Flames engulf the Palatine Hill. It is 476 AD, and the last Western Roman emperor, a teenager named Romulus Augustulus, watches as a Germanic warrior enters his palace. There are no armies to defend it, no legions. The boy who bears the name of Rome's founder will be deposed without bloodshed. 1,229 years after its founding, the Western Roman Empire fades away. But how did Rome rise from a shepherd village on the banks of the Tiber to become the greatest empire the world had ever known? And more importantly, what destroyed it from within? Let's go back 1,200 years to 753 BC. On the seven hills by the Tiber River, in the heart of the Italian peninsula, small communities of Latin shepherds and farmers live in thatched huts. They are no different from hundreds of other settlements. Rome does not yet exist as a concept. These hills are strategic. They control a ford across the Tiber, the only safe crossing point for miles. Whoever controls this place controls trade between northern and southern Italy. Roman tradition transformed these humble origins into an epic legend. As they would tell centuries later, two twins, descendants of the Trojan hero Aeneas, were abandoned on the banks of the Tiber. A she-wolf suckled them. The brothers, Romulus and Remus, grew up and decided to found a city. But they argued over which hill to choose. In a fit of rage, Romulus killed Remus and marked the sacred boundaries of his city on the Palatine Hill. It was April 21st, 753 BC. The new city needed inhabitants, so Romulus offered asylum to criminals, runaway slaves, and exiles. Rome was born as a refuge for the desperate. But the new city had a problem, a shortage of women. The Romans invited their Sabine neighbors to a festival. In the midst of the celebrations, Romulus's men abducted the Sabine women. When the Sabine warriors returned to take revenge, something unexpected happened. The abducted women stood between their fathers and their new husbands, demanding peace. Romans and Sabines merged into a single people. This story, whether real or mythical, reveals something fundamental about the Roman character: their capacity to integrate other peoples, to transform enemies into citizens. During the first 244 years of its existence, Rome was ruled by 7 kings. Some were Latins, others Etruscans, the most advanced people in Italy at that time. King Servius Tullius built the first stone walls. Tarquinius Superbus paved the Forum and constructed the great drainage system, the Cloaca Maxima. Under the Etruscan kings, Rome grew from a village into a city. But the last king, Tarquinius, lived up to his name. He was cruel, despotic, and tyrannical. In 509 BC, an incident occurred that would destroy the monarchy. Sextus Tarquinius, the king's son, raped Lucretia, the wife of a Roman nobleman. Lucretia gathered her family, recounted what had happened, and plunged a dagger into her chest. Her spilled blood ignited a rebellion. The Roman nobles, led by Lucius Junius Brutus, expelled the royal family. Rome swore that never again would a single man hold absolute power. The Republic was born. The Romans invented a revolutionary political system. Instead of a king, 2 consuls, elected annually, would share supreme power. Each could veto the other's decisions. A senate of patrician elders would advise on all important matters. Lesser magistrates would administer justice and finances. Power was fragmented, controlled, and limited. It was a system designed by aristocrats for aristocrats, but it contained a revolutionary idea. The law was above the individual. But the new republic immediately faced an internal crisis. The plebeians, Rome's working class, had no representation. They could not be consuls. They did not know the laws because the patricians kept them secret. In 494 BC, the plebeians abandoned the city en masse and settled on the Sacred Mount. They declared a general strike. Without plebeians, there were no soldiers, no trade, no artisans. The patricians had to negotiate. Thus were born the tribunes of the plebs, magistrates with the sacred power to veto any decision that harmed the people. Rome was learning that the strength of a city lay not only in its walls, but in the social contract among its citizens. It is the year 450 BC. Rome is still a middling city on the Italian peninsula, surrounded by enemies. The Etruscans to the north, the Samnites to the south, and the Greek cities along the coast. No one could have predicted that this city would become an empire. But Rome possesses something unique: a relentless military machine fueled by a political system that transforms war into civic virtue. Every Roman citizen is a soldier. Every conquest brings new citizens. It is a perfect expansion machine about to be activated. What Rome doesn't yet know is that its military success will sow the seeds of its own destruction. It is the year 390 BC, and Rome is burning. Gallic warriors have crossed the Apennines, defeated the Roman army, and are now sacking the city. The elderly senators sit in their curule chairs in the forum, motionless as statues, awaiting death with dignity. A Gallic warrior, mistaking one of these figures for a statue, touches his beard. The elderly senator strikes him with his staff. He is killed instantly. Every senator is executed. Only the Capitoline Hill holds out, defended by a handful of soldiers. According to legend, the sacred geese of the temple of Juno warn of a Gallic night attack, saving the citadel. Finally, Rome pays 1,000 pounds of gold to the Gauls to withdraw. It is the deepest humiliation. But from the ashes of this defeat, Rome emerges with an iron will. Never again will it be vulnerable. Rome is rebuilding its army from scratch. The new system is revolutionary. The Roman legion is no longer a compact mass of soldiers, but a flexible machine divided into maniples, small units of 120 men that can maneuver independently. The soldiers carry the scutum, a curved rectangular shield that protects almost the entire body, and the gladius, a short sword designed for thrusting in close combat. But the true Roman weapon is not steel, but discipline. The soldiers train 6 hours a day. They march 30 kilometers carrying 30 kilos of equipment. Every night, they build a complete fortified camp, even though they will march the next day. They are engineers, builders, and warriors all at once. For the next 100 years, Rome systematically conquered the entire Italian peninsula. Each victory followed the same pattern. Rome defeated its enemies, but then offered them something revolutionary. It didn't enslave or destroy them. It offered alliances, treaties, and paths to integration. Some peoples received full Roman citizenship. Others became allies with local autonomy, but an obligation to provide troops. Rome built roads connecting each conquered city to the capital. These weren't just trade routes. They were military arteries along which legions could be deployed in days. By 272 BC, Rome controlled all of Italy. But to the south, across the narrow sea separating Italy from Sicily, lay its true rival, Carthage. Carthage is a Phoenician trading power that controls the western Mediterranean. Its merchants dominate the sea routes. Its navy is invincible. Sicily, the richest island in the Mediterranean, is divided between Greek colonies and Carthaginian territories. When a Sicilian city appeals to Rome for help against Carthage, the senators debate. Crossing to Sicily would mean confronting a naval empire when Rome has hardly any ships of its own. But the opportunity to control Sicily, the breadbasket of the Mediterranean, is too tempting. In 264 BC, Rome declares war on Carthage. The Punic Wars begin, the conflict that will define the fate of the ancient world. Rome faced an impossible problem. It needed to defeat Carthage at sea, but it had no naval tradition. The Roman solution was characteristic: copy and innovate. When a Carthaginian ship ran aground on the Italian coast, Roman engineers dismantled it piece by piece. In 60 days, they built 120 replicas. But Rome added a decisive innovation: the corvus, a grappling hook that could be thrown over enemy ships, turning naval battles into infantry engagements. At the Battle of Mylae, the inexperienced Roman fleet defeated the seasoned Carthaginian armada. Carthage faced an enemy that transformed every weakness into a strength. The First Punic War lasted 23 years. Rome lost 700 ships and hundreds of thousands of men in storms and battles. But Rome had something Carthage did not: an inexhaustible supply of soldiers from all over Italy. In 241 BC, a weary Carthage sued for peace. Sicily became the first Roman province outside of Italy. Rome was no longer a regional power. It was now an empire. But Carthaginian humiliation bred revenge. In Carthage, a general named Hamilcar Barca made his 9-year-old son, Hannibal, swear eternal hatred for Rome. That boy would grow up to become the greatest enemy Rome would ever face. It is spring in the year 218 BC. Shepherds in the Alpine villages watch in awe an impossible spectacle: 38,000 soldiers, 8,000 horsemen, and 37 war elephants cross the highest mountains in Europe. The men slide across glaciers, blast through passes blocked by snow, and are attacked by alpine tribes. Thousands die. But Hannibal Barca is fulfilling the promise he made to his father. He has marched from Spain, crossed southern Gaul, and now descends into Italy. Rome expected to fight in Spain or Africa. It never imagined that Carthage would take the war to the heart of Italy. Hannibal is not just a general, he is a brilliant strategist. At Lake Trasimene, he lays a perfect ambush. He conceals his troops in the mist-shrouded hills. As the Roman army marches along the narrow shore of the lake, the Carthaginians attack from the heights. Trapped between the mountains and the water, 15,000 Romans are massacred. Another 15,000 are captured. The Roman consul is killed in the battle. Rome panics. But Hannibal makes a crucial strategic error. Instead of marching immediately on Rome, he spends 2 years trying to convince the Italian cities to rebel against Rome. He underestimates the loyalty that Rome has cultivated over centuries of shrewd integration. In August of 216 BC, the Battle of Cannae took place, Hannibal's tactical masterpiece and the worst defeat in Roman history. 80,000 Roman legionaries faced 50,000 Carthaginians. The Romans were confident in their numerical superiority. Hannibal positioned his troops in a concave formation, weak in the center. The Romans attacked the center, which slowly retreated, drawing them in. Then the Carthaginian cavalry crushed the Roman flanks and completely surrounded the army. The massacre began. 70,000 Romans died in a single day. This is the equivalent of losing 150 modern divisions. The survivors collected rings from the fingers of the corpses of senators and knights. They filled 3 bushels with them. Carthage could have won the war that day. But again, Hannibal did not march on Rome. Overconfidence? Lack of siege equipment? We will never know. What we do know is that he bought Rome something precious: time. After Cannae, any other city would have negotiated peace. Rome does the unthinkable. It refuses to consider defeat. The Senate forbids the word peace. Slaves are freed and armed. The elderly and children parade through the streets to feign normalcy. When Carthaginian emissaries arrive to negotiate ransoms for prisoners, Rome refuses to receive them. The message is clear. Rome does not negotiate, does not surrender, does not acknowledge defeat. Quintus Fabius Maximus is appointed dictator, and he implements a strategy of attrition, avoiding pitched battles, harassing enemy supply lines, scorched earth. They call it the Fabian tactic. It is frustrating, humiliating, and effective. Year after year, Hannibal dominates the battlefield but cannot win the war. The Italian cities do not rise up en masse. Carthaginian reinforcements do not arrive. Hannibal's tactical genius clashes with Rome's strategic resistance. It is the year 204 BC. While Hannibal remains in southern Italy, unable to take Rome or retreat without admitting defeat, a young Roman general named Publius Cornelius Scipio proposes a bold strategy. Take the war to Africa, attack Carthage directly. The Senate hesitates, but ultimately approves. Scipio lands near Carthage with 2 legions. He has studied Hannibal's every move, copied his tactics. When he ravages the Carthaginian countryside, the Carthaginian government has no choice. It must recall Hannibal to defend the mother city. After 15 years, Hannibal leaves Italy. He never saw the walls of Rome. In October of 202 BC, on the plain of Zama, the student faced the master. Hannibal deployed 80 war elephants, hoping to break through the Roman lines. But Scipio had prepared his legions to open corridors, allowing the charging elephants to pass through gaps. The elephants crossed without causing damage and were cut down by the Roman rearguard. When the infantry clashed, Scipio executed a perfected version of the maneuver at Cannae. His cavalry surrounded the Carthaginians. This time it was the Africans who were trapped. Carthage was decisively defeated. Hannibal, Rome's greatest enemy, was forced to negotiate a humiliating peace. Carthage lost its fleet, its territories in Spain, had to pay a massive indemnity, and was forbidden from waging war without Roman permission. Scipio returned to Rome with a new name, Africanus. The victory over Hannibal transformed Rome's image. The Hellenistic kingdoms of the eastern Mediterranean, Egypt, Syria, and Macedonia, wealthy heirs to the empire of Alexander the Great, now had to regard this Italian republic as a world power. When King Philip V of Macedon allied himself with Hannibal during the war, Rome did not forget. In 200 BC, Roman legions crossed the Adriatic Sea. It was the first time Rome had intervened militarily in the Greek world. The Macedonians, fighting in the traditional closed phalanx with long spears, were crushed by the flexibility of the Roman maniples. The Battle of Cynocephaly demonstrated the superiority of the legionary system. At the Isthmian Games in 196 BC, the Roman general Titus Quinctius Flaminius made a startling proclamation before the delegations of all the Greek cities. Rome declared Greece free. All the cities that Macedonia had dominated were now autonomous. The Roman legions withdrew. The Greeks erupted in jubilation. Rome presented itself not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. It was masterful propaganda, but it also reflected a reality. Rome was not yet ready to administer an Eastern empire. Greek freedom would last only as long as it suited Rome. But at that moment, Rome gained something more valuable than territory. It gained moral legitimacy. Antiochus III, the great Seleucid king who ruled from Anatolia to the borders of India, watched Roman expansion with a mixture of concern and opportunism. When Hannibal, exiled from Carthage, arrived at his court offering his services, Antiochus saw an opportunity to halt Rome's advance. In 192 BC, he invaded Greece. It was a catastrophic mistake. The Roman legions defeated him at Thermopylae, crossed into Asia Minor, and crushed him at the Battle of Magnesia. For the first time, Roman legions set foot on Asian soil. The peace treaty was devastating. Antiochus had to relinquish all of Anatolia, surrender his fleet, and pay the largest war indemnity in ancient history. The balance of power in the Mediterranean had been irreparably shattered. In Rome, an old senator named Marcus Porcius Cato ends every speech, regardless of the subject, with the same phrase, Ceterum censeo Carthaginem esse delendum. Furthermore, I believe that Carthage must be destroyed. Carthage has recovered economically, and this terrifies Rome. When Carthage defends itself against attacks from Numidia, a Roman ally, it violates the treaty that forbade waging war without permission. Rome has its pretext. In 149 BC, a Roman army besieges Carthage. The city resists desperately for 3 years. In the spring of 146 BC, General Scipio Aemilianus, adopted grandson of the victor of Zama, breached the walls of Carthage. What followed was a 6-day massacre, house by house, street by street. 50,000 Carthaginians died. The 50,000 survivors were sold into slavery. Scipio ordered the city burned to the ground. According to Roman legend, salt was scattered over the ruins so that nothing would ever grow again. A civilization that had dominated the Mediterranean for centuries vanished in a matter of days. The site of Carthage became the Roman province of Africa. Rome eliminated its only comparable rival. The Mediterranean was now a Roman lake, Mare Nostrum, our sea. But as Rome conquers the world, something is changing within. Soldiers who spend decades on campaigns return to Italy to find their small farms ruined, replaced by vast estates worked by slaves captured in the wars. The middle class of small farmers, the backbone of the Republic, disintegrates. Thousands migrate to Rome, forming a poor and resentful urban mass. The wealth of conquest is not distributed equitably. Generals return with enormous fortunes. Senatorial aristocrats grow rich from provincial grants. A chasm opens between rich and poor. In 133 BC, a young tribune named Tiberius Gracchus proposed a land reform law, limiting the amount of public land a person could own and redistributing the surplus to poor citizens. This was a direct threat to senatorial interests. When Tiberius sought re-election as tribune, violating custom, the senators led a mob that beat him to death with chair legs. His body was thrown into the Tiber. 10 years later, his brother Gaius Gracchus attempted similar reforms. He, too, was assassinated, along with 3,000 of his followers. Citizen blood stained the Forum for the first time in centuries. The Republic began to devour itself. Rome has conquered the Mediterranean world in just 150 years. It controls Spain, North Africa, Greece, Macedonia, and parts of Anatolia. It is the undisputed power of the known world. But the republican system was designed to govern a city-state, not an empire of 50 million people. The institutions creak under the weight of conquests. Generals command armies that are loyal to them personally, not to the republic. Political competition becomes deadly. The unwritten rules that maintain the balance crumble. Rome stands at the height of its power and on the verge of internal collapse. The question is no longer whether Rome will conquer more territory, but whether Rome will survive its own success. It is January of 49 BC. On the northern border of Italy, a shallow river called the Rubicon marks the sacred boundary. No general may cross it with armed troops without an order from the Senate under penalty of death. Gaius Julius Caesar, governor of Gaul, has conquered in 8 years all the territory from the Alps to the Atlantic. He has subdued 400 tribes, defeated 3 million Gauls, enslaved 1 million, and crossed the Rhine and the English Channel. He is the most successful general in Roman history. But the Senate, terrified by his popularity, has ordered him to return to Rome without an army to stand trial for alleged illegalities committed during his consulship. Caesar knows that if he obeys, his political enemies will destroy him. He must decide, obey and die politically, or cross the Rubicon and become an enemy of the state. He looks at his officers and utters the words that will change history. Alia iacta est, the die is cast. Caesar crosses the Rubicon with the 13th Legion. The civil war begins. To understand how Rome reached this point of self-destruction, we must go back 60 years. In 107 BC, a general named Gaius Marius fundamentally transformed the Roman army. Until then, only citizens with property could serve, using their own equipment. Marius opened the legions to landless citizens, the proletariat. The state provided weapons and training. But there was an unforeseen consequence. These impoverished soldiers became entirely dependent on their generals for land upon discharge. Their loyalty was no longer to Rome, but to the commander who would enrich them. Marius himself used his legions as a political power, being elected consul 7 times, breaking all traditions. Between 90 and 88 BC, Rome's Italian allies, tired of providing soldiers without receiving full Roman citizenship, rebelled. This was the social war, the war of the partners. Italy burned in civil war for 3 years. Rome finally won, but at the terrible price of granting citizenship to all Italians. Roman citizenship, formerly the privilege of the city of Rome, now extended from the Alps to the Strait of Messina. Rome was no longer just a city but a nation, but its institutions remained those of a city-state. Lucius Cornelius Sulla was the first general to march his legions on Rome itself. In 88 BC, when the Senate tried to wrest command of a lucrative campaign in the east from him and give it to Marius, Sulla simply took the city by force. He set a terrifying precedent. Military power could prevail over civil authority. After defeating King Mithridates in the east, Sulla returned to Italy in 83 BC and launched a devastating civil war against Marius's supporters. When he emerged victorious, he declared himself dictator and published proscription lists, names of political enemies who could be killed with impunity, with rewards offered to the assassins. 40 senators and 1,600 knights were massacred. Their property was confiscated. Sulla attempted to restore the Senate's power through reforms, but the genie of political violence had already been unleashed. In 73 BC, a Thracian gladiator named Spartacus led a slave rebellion that swelled to 70,000 men. His army of desperate rebels defeated legion after legion. For 2 years, Spartacus controlled southern Italy. Rome, conquering foreign empires, could not subdue its own slaves. Finally, Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, financed and commanded 8 legions that crushed the rebellion. 6,000 captured slaves were crucified along the Appian Way from Capua to Rome, one every 40 meters, for 200 kilometers. Their bodies were left to rot as a warning. Crassus had won military glory, but he was overshadowed by a young general returning victorious from Spain, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus. 3 men now rule Rome: Pompey, the most famous general; Crassus, the wealthiest; and Julius Caesar, a debt-ridden but politically brilliant nobleman. In 60 BC, they form a secret alliance, the First Triumvirate. It is not official, but it controls Rome in practice. Caesar is elected consul, and passes the laws that Pompey and Crassus desire. In return, they assure him the governorship of Gaul, where he can gain military glory and plunder. For 8 years, Caesar conquers Gaul in brutal campaigns. His commentaries on the Gallic War are masterful propaganda that transforms massacres into heroic feats. Meanwhile, Crassus seeks comparable glory by invading the Parthian Empire. It is a catastrophe. At the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BC, the Parthians annihilate his legions. Crassus is captured, and, according to legend, the Parthians melt gold and pour it down his throat, saying, "Now gorge yourself on what you so coveted." With Crassus dead, only Pompey and Caesar remain. Pompey, increasingly aligned with the senatorial conservatives, begins to see Caesar as a threat. Caesar requests permission to be elected consul without having to come to Rome in person, while retaining his military command. The Senate refuses, demanding that he disband his armies. It is a trap. Without armies, Caesar will be defenseless against his political enemies. In December of 50 BC, the Senate passes an ultimatum. Caesar must disband his troops or be declared a public enemy. Caesar attempts to negotiate. The Senate rejects any compromise. Pompey is appointed defender of the Republic. Caesar must choose between political suicide or civil war. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon in January of 49 BC, he had only 1 legion. Pompey controlled all the legions in Italy and the provinces. In theory, Caesar stood no chance. But Caesar was a master of speed. Before Pompey could react, Caesar marched south, taking city after city without resistance. Pompey's soldiers deserted en masse to Caesar, who paid better and pardoned generously. In 60 days, Caesar controlled all of Italy. Pompey fled to Greece with loyal senators, planning to gather resources from the east. Caesar did not pursue him immediately. He first neutralized Spain, Pompey's western power base, in a 4-month campaign. "I am going to fight an army without a general," he said, "and then face a general without an army." In August of 48 BC, on the plain of Pharsalus in Greece, the 2 greatest Roman generals faced each other. Pompey had 45,000 men, Caesar only 22,000, but they were veterans of the Gallic Wars. When Pompey's cavalry charged Caesar's flank, he deployed a hidden 4th line of infantry with specific orders: aim for the faces of the horsemen. The Roman knights, vain aristocrats, fled in terror at the threat to their faces. Pompey's flank collapsed. Seeing the defeat, Pompey fled the battlefield. Caesar pursued his rival to Egypt, where the young King Ptolemy, believing he was pleasing the victor, assassinated Pompey and sent his head to Caesar. Caesar wept upon seeing the head of his former friend and son-in-law. He ordered the assassins executed. Pompey, despite everything, was a Roman. For the next 4 years, Caesar crushed the last pockets of Pompey's resistance in Africa and Spain. He returned to Rome as the undisputed ruler. The Senate appointed him dictator for life. Caesar implemented radical reforms. He redistributed land to veterans and the poor, reduced the national debt, reformed the calendar, creating the Julian calendar with 365 days, extended citizenship to the provinces, and planned new colonies. But he did not restore the Republic. He could not. The system was irreparably broken. Caesar concentrated all power in his own hands and assumed the title of Imperator, Supreme Commander. Some senators, led by Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, decided that Caesar had become king in all but name, exactly what Rome had sworn never to tolerate 500 years earlier. It is March 15th, 44 BC. Caesar goes to the Senate, ignoring numerous warnings. A soothsayer has told him, "Beware the Ides of March." His wife, Calpurnia, has had terrible nightmares. But Caesar goes. When he enters Pompey's porch, where the Senate is temporarily meeting, the conspirators surround him under the pretext of presenting a petition. Tilius Cimber pulls at his toga, the signal. Daggers are drawn. Caesar tries to defend himself, but there are too many. 23 stab wounds pierce his body. When he sees Brutus among the attackers, his friend, perhaps his illegitimate son, Caesar ceases to resist. He covers his face with his toga and falls at the foot of Pompey's statue. The dictator who conquered Gaul and won the civil war bleeds to death on the Senate floor. The conspirators believe they have saved the Republic. They fail to understand that they already killed it when they killed Caesar. All they have accomplished is to ensure more civil war. In the house of Mark Antony, consul and Caesar's closest lieutenant, the assassinated dictator's will is read. Everyone expects Antony to be named heir. Shockwaves ripple when the name is revealed: Gaius Octavius, an 18-year-old, Caesar's great-nephew. No one considers him politically significant. He is a student at Apollonia when news of the assassination arrives. His mother begs him to renounce the inheritance. It is too dangerous. But Octavius accepts. He takes the name Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. He travels to Rome without an army, without money, without allies. He has only one name: Caesar, and that name commands allegiance. Marcus Junius Brutus and the conspirators thought Rome would hail them as saviors. They were sorely mistaken. At Caesar's funeral, Mark Antony delivers a masterful oration. He displays Caesar's blood-stained toga, points out each stab wound, reads the will that bequeaths 75 drachmas to every Roman citizen, and converts his private gardens into a public park. The crowd erupts in fury. The assassins must flee Rome. Italy is not safe. Brutus and Cassius escape to the east, where they begin to raise armies. Antony controls Rome. He has the legions, the prestige, the power. The young Octavian seems insignificant in comparison. But Octavian learned from his great-uncle. He began recruiting Caesar's veterans using his own name and borrowed money. When Antony attempted to seize Cisalpine Gaul by force, Octavian formed a temporary alliance with the Senate. In April of 43 BC, at the Battle of Mutina, the combined armies of Octavian and the Republican consuls defeated Antony. Both consuls were killed in battle. Octavian, at the age of 20, commanded the only army near Rome. He marched on the city and demanded to be appointed consul. The Senate, seeing his 8 legions encamped along the Tiber, agreed. Octavian understands that he cannot defeat Caesar's assassins alone. He needs Antony. In November of 43 BC, Octavian, Antony, and a third general, Lepidus, meet on an island in the Rhine River. For 3 days they negotiate. The result is the Second Triumvirate, this time legal and official. The 3 men are named triumvirs for the reconstitution of the Republic, with dictatorial powers for 5 years. But first they need to eliminate enemies and raise money. They publish proscription lists. 200 senators and 2,000 knights are declared enemies. They can be killed by anyone. Among the victims is Marcus Tullius Cicero, Rome's greatest orator, whose tongue has attacked Antony in devastating speeches called philippics. When the soldiers reach him at his villa, Cicero offers his neck. They cut off his head and hands. Antony displays them in the Forum. The Republic devours its best sons. In October of 42 BC, on the plains of Philippi in Macedonia, the armies of the triumvirate clashed with the legions of Brutus and Cassius. 19 legions against 19 legions, 100,000 Romans killing 100,000 Romans. In the first battle, Brutus's wing crushed Octavian's forces, and Octavian fled, Illinois. But Antony's wing routed Cassius's legions. Believing all lost, Cassius committed suicide. 3 weeks later, the second battle took place. This time, Brutus was utterly defeated. Contemplating the slaughter of his men, Brutus threw himself upon his sword. His last words were a curse upon virtue. He had believed virtue to be something real, but it was only an empty word. The tyrannicides were dead. Caesar had been avenged. But what kind of Rome remained? Antony receives the wealthy East as his province. In Tarsus, Cilicia, he summons Cleopatra VII, Queen of Egypt, to answer for her alleged support of Caesar's assassins. Cleopatra arrives in a golden barge, dressed as Venus, under a purple canopy, rowed by slaves disguised as nymphs. Antony, captivated, follows her to Alexandria. Thus begins a tale of love and political disaster. Cleopatra had been Julius Caesar's lover, with whom she had a son, Caesarion. Now she seduces Antony. They spend the winter in decadent revelry. Antony neglects his Roman duties. Meanwhile, Octavian in Rome works tirelessly, securing Italy, building loyalties, and presenting himself as Caesar's true heir. For 10 years, Antony and Octavian maintained a tense peace, dividing the Roman world between them. But gradually, Antony became more Eastern. He married Cleopatra even though he was already married to Octavia. Octavian's sister. He recognized Caesarion as Caesar's true son, threatening Octavian's claims. He held a ceremony in Alexandria where he distributed Roman provinces among his children with Cleopatra. Octavian exploited this masterfully. He convinced the Senate that Antony had ceased to be Roman, that he planned to move the capital to Alexandria, and that it was under the spell of a foreign queen. In 32 BC, Rome declared war not on Antony, but on Cleopatra. It was technically a foreign war, not a civil war. It was brilliant propaganda. On September 2nd, 31 BC, off Cape Actium in western Greece, the fleets of Octavian and Antony clashed. Antony's eastern fleet was larger but composed of heavy, slow ships. Octavian's fleet, commanded by his brilliant Admiral Agrippa, had smaller, more agile vessels. The battle was chaotic and undecisive for hours. Then something unexpected happened. Cleopatra, with 60 Egyptian ships, suddenly fled. Antony abandoned his fleet and pursued her with only a few ships. It was the end. His fleet, demoralized by the abandonment of their commander, surrendered. His legions on land, upon learning of Antony's flight, joined Octavian without a fight. Antony and Cleopatra escaped to Egypt, but they were only delaying the inevitable. In August of 30 BC, Octavian entered Alexandria. Antony, mistakenly believing Cleopatra had committed suicide, stabbed himself with his sword. He discovered she was alive and begged to be brought to her. He died in her arms. Cleopatra attempted to negotiate with Octavian, trying to seduce him as she had seduced Caesar and Antony. But Octavian was immune to charm. He was cold, calculating, and pragmatic. Cleopatra realized she would be taken to Rome to be paraded in chains in Octavian's triumph. Rather than suffer this humiliation, she committed suicide. Tradition says she allowed herself to be bitten by an asp, a venomous snake hidden in a basket of figs. Octavian ordered Caesarion killed, eliminating his only possible rival. Antony and Cleopatra's children were pardoned and adopted by Octavia. Egypt, the last independent Hellenistic kingdom, became Octavian's personal province. After 100 years of intermittent civil wars, a single man controlled the entire Mediterranean world. Octavian returned to Rome in 29 BC as absolute ruler. But he had learned from Caesar's death. Naked power breeds murder. He had to disguise his monarchy with republican trappings. In January of 27 BC, in a theatrical session of the Senate, Octavian restored the Republic. He returned all his powers to the Senate and the Roman people. The Senate, duly rehearsed, begged him to continue ruling Rome. He agreed reluctantly. They bestowed upon him the title of Augustus, the revered one, a name with religious connotations unprecedented in monarchy. Formally, he was only the princeps, the first citizen. In reality, he was emperor in all but name. He controlled all the legions. He held tribunician power for life. He directed foreign policy. He appointed governors. But he carefully preserved republican institutions. The Senate met, consuls were elected, and the magistracies continued. It was a fiction, but a necessary one. Augustus transformed Rome from a republic to a monarchy without anyone accepting the change. The republic is dead. Long live the empire. It is August 19, 14 AD. In Nola, near Naples, Augustus lies on his deathbed at the age of 75. He has ruled Rome for 44 years. He has transformed a republic ravaged by civil wars into a prosperous empire. Have I played my part well? He asks the friends gathered around his bedside, like an actor questioning an audience. These are his last words. He dies peacefully. The Senate immediately deifies him. Augustus becomes a god. But his true legacy is not his deification but the system he created, the Principate, a monarchy disguised as a republic that will bring 2 centuries of relative peace and prosperity to the Mediterranean. During Augustus' reign, something extraordinary happened: peace. For the first time in a century, there were no civil wars on Roman soil. The borders were secure. Trade flourished. Augustus closed the doors of the Temple of Janus, which remained open during times of war. They had only been closed twice in 700 years. Under Augustus, they were closed 3 times. Aqueducts, theaters, temples, and public baths were built. The network of Roman roads reached 80,000 kilometers. A merchant could travel from Hispania to Syria without crossing hostile borders. Latin and Greek culturally united 100 million people. This was the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, which would last for 2 centuries. But expansion has its limits. In September of 9 AD, 3 Roman legions marched through the Teutoburg forest in Germania. Commander Publius Quinctilius Varus trusted his guide, Arminius, a Germanic prince educated in Rome. It was a trap. Arminius had united the Germanic tribes. In the dense forest, where the legions could not form their lines, the Germans attacked. For 3 days they massacred the trapped Romans. 15,000 legionaries died. Varus committed suicide. The eagles of the 17th, 18th, and 19th legions were captured. Augustus, upon receiving the news, banged his head against the walls, shouting, "Varus, give me back my legions." Rome would never conquer Germania beyond the Rhine. The empire had reached its natural limits. Augustus was succeeded by his stepson Tiberius, a competent but embittered general. Tiberius ruled well but retired to the island of Capri, leaving Rome in the hands of his praetorian prefect Sejanus, who ruled by terror. When Tiberius died in 37 AD, the empire passed to his great-nephew, Gaius, known as Caligula, Little Boot, a military nickname from his childhood. Caligula started well, but went mad, perhaps from an illness. He proclaimed himself a living god. He appointed his horse consul. He built a 5-kilometer-long pontoon bridge to ride across the sea. He spent the entire imperial treasury in 4 years. In 41 AD, the Praetorian Guard murdered him in an underground passage of the palace, along with his wife and infant daughter. They found his uncle, Claudius, hiding behind a curtain, terrified. They proclaimed him emperor. Claudius is considered weak. He stutters and limps. Everyone has underestimated him. Yet he turns out to be a competent ruler. He conquers Britain in 43 AD, something even Caesar never managed to achieve permanently. He expands the imperial bureaucracy, improves infrastructure, and builds a new port for Rome. But his wives destroy him. His third wife, Messalina, is executed for conspiring against him. His fourth wife, Agrippina, is his niece and has enormous ambitions. She wants Nero, her son from a previous marriage, to inherit the throne. In 54 AD, Agrippina poisons Claudius with fungi. Nero, aged 16, becomes emperor. The first 5 years of Nero's reign, guided by his tutor, the philosopher Seneca, and the prefect, Burrus, were excellent. But gradually, Nero revealed his true nature. He considered himself an artist and poet. He performed in public theaters, something scandalous for an emperor. He sang in competitions. He ordered the murder of his mother, Agrippina, when she tried to control him. He murdered his wife, Octavia, to marry Poppaea Sabina. In July of 64 AD, a devastating fire swept through 10 of Rome's 14 districts. Rumors circulated that Nero himself started the fire to build his new Domus Aurea, the Golden House, an extravagant palace. Nero needed scapegoats. The Christians, a minority Jewish sect that follows the teachings of a preacher executed in Judea decades earlier, are blamed for the fire. Nero unleashes the first official persecution. Christians are arrested en masse. Some are covered in animal skins and torn apart by dogs. Others are crucified. Many are covered in pitch and burned alive as human torches in Nero's gardens. Among the victims is Peter, one of Jesus' original disciples, crucified upside down in the Vatican. Paul of Tarsus, the great Christian missionary, is also beheaded. Christianity, which in the year 64 is an insignificant sect, will remember these martyrs. Their tombs will become holy sites. Centuries later, St. Peter's Basilica will be built over Peter's tomb. In 68 AD, the provincial governors rebelled against Nero. The Senate declared him a public enemy. Nero fled Rome and clumsily committed suicide, needing a slave to help him plunge the dagger into his body. His last words were, "What an artist dies with me." With Nero, the Julio-Claudian dynasty ended. The year 69 began, the year of the 4 emperors. Galba, an old senator, ruled for 7 months before being assassinated. Otho ruled for 3 months before committing suicide after losing a battle. Vitellius ruled for 8 months before being lynched in the Forum. Finally, Vespasian, a general who was crushing a rebellion in Judea, took power. He was a soldier emperor, practical, without aristocratic pretensions. He restored the finances, rebuilt Rome, and began construction of the Colosseum. When he died in 79 AD, his son Titus succeeded him peacefully. The dynastic succession was once again secure. The emperors of the 2nd century AD are known as the Five Good Emperors: Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. Each chose the most capable candidate as his successor instead of passing power to his biological sons. Trajan conquered Dacia, present-day Romania and Moldova, bringing immense wealth in gold and slaves. He built Trajan's Forum and Trajan's Column, expanding the empire to its greatest extent. Hadrian, his successor, abandoned Trajan's conquests in Mesopotamia, deeming them unsustainable, and built defensive fortifications: Hadrian's Wall in Britain and the Limes in Germania. Marcus Aurelius, a Stoic philosopher, wrote his meditations while commanding armies on the Danube. The empire reached its zenith of size, prosperity, and culture. But even in this golden age, there are signs of future troubles. The wars on the frontiers are increasingly defensive. The Germanic and Parthian tribes are constantly pressing in. In 166, a devastating plague, possibly smallpox, arrives from the east with the legions returning from Parthia. The Antonine Plague kills between 5 and 10 million people over 15 years, severely weakening the empire. The frontiers require more soldiers, but there are fewer men to recruit. Military costs rise while tax revenues fall. Marcus Aurelius is forced to sell imperial jewels to pay the legions. And he makes a fatal mistake. He breaks with the tradition of meritorious adoption and names his biological son Commodus, emperor. A narcissistic disaster who believes himself to be the reincarnation of Hercules. He fights as a gladiator in the Colosseum and is finally strangled in his bath in 192. His death triggers another civil war. The Principate system, which had functioned magnificently for 2 centuries, begins to crumble. Legions from different provinces are simultaneously proclaiming emperors. Loyalty is no longer to Rome, but to whoever pays the most. The Golden Age is ending, and chaos is approaching. It is the year 193 AD. The Praetorian Guard, the elite troops protecting the emperor, has assassinated Pertinax after only 87 days on the throne. Now they do the unthinkable. They auction off the empire. They set up a podium in their camp and announce that whoever bids the most will be proclaimed emperor. 2 men bid: Sulpicianus, the assassinated emperor's father-in-law, and Didius Julianus, a wealthy senator. Julianus offers 25,000 sesterces per soldier. The Praetorians proclaim him emperor. But the legions in the provinces are horrified. 3 generals are simultaneously proclaimed emperors by their troops: Septimius Severus in Pannonia, Pescennius Niger in Syria, and Clodius Albinus in Britain. A brutal civil war erupts. Severus marches on Rome. The Praetorians desert Julianus, who is beheaded after reigning for only 66 days. Severus defeats his rivals in bloody campaigns. The message is clear: legions make emperors, not the Senate or the Roman people. Septimius Severus reorganized the empire as a military dictatorship. He dramatically increased soldiers' pay. He allowed legionaries to marry, something previously forbidden. On his deathbed in Britain in 211, he advised his sons: enrich the soldiers and despise everyone else. This marked the end of any republican pretense. The empire was now openly a military monarchy. His successors would be generals who ruled by force. The Severan dynasty ruled until 235, when the last Severan emperor, Alexander, was assassinated by his own troops. What followed was collapse. Between 235 and 284, a period of 50 years, more than 50 men claimed the title of emperor. Most ruled for months before being killed by their own troops or by rivals. Legions in different provinces proclaimed emperors simultaneously. There were periods when 6 legitimate emperors fought each other. This period is known as the crisis of the 3rd century or the military anarchy. Borders collapsed. Germanic tribes crossed the Rhine and the Danube, sacking cities as far as Italy. The Sasanian Persians, who had replaced the Parthian Empire, invaded the eastern provinces. In 260, Emperor Valerian was captured by the Persian king Shapur I, the greatest humiliation since Cannæ. According to legend, Shapur used Valerian as a human stepping stone to mount his horse. The empire fragments. In 260 AD, The western provinces of Gaul, Hispania, and Britain secede, forming the Gallic Empire under General Postumus. It lasts for 15 years as an independent state. In the east, Palmyra, an oasis city in the Syrian desert, becomes independent under Queen Zenobia, who conquers Egypt and Anatolia. For a terrifying time, the Central Roman Empire controls only Italy, the Balkans, and North Africa. The economy collapses. Silver coinage is adulterated with so much bronze that it loses 90% of its value. Inflation is catastrophic. Trade disintegrates. Cities shrink behind makeshift walls built with stones from dismantled public buildings. The great urban age of the empire appears to be over. It is the darkest period in the 1,000 years of Roman history. In 284, a Dalmatian general named Diocles was proclaimed emperor by his troops. He took the name Diocletian. He was a man of humble origins, but an administrative genius. He understood that the empire was too large for one man to rule. In 286, he established the Tetrarchy, the rule of four. He divided the empire into two halves, east and west. Each half had an Augustus, the senior emperor, and a Caesar, the junior emperor, who would succeed him. The four ruled cooperatively. Diocletian was Augustus of the east, with his capital in Nicomedia. Maximian was Augustus of the west, with his capital in Milan. Rome was no longer the imperial capital. It was too vulnerable and too far from the critical frontiers. Diocletian radically reorganized the empire. He doubled the size of the army to 650,000 men. He divided the provinces into smaller units, doubling their number from 50 to 100, making provincial rebellions more difficult. He completely separated civil and military authority. He reorganized the tax system, establishing taxes in kind to prevent monetary inflation. He set maximum prices for all goods through the Edict of Maximum Prices. He tied peasants and artisans to their professions, making jobs hereditary. This marked the beginning of medieval feudalism. Diocletian also completely deified the imperial figure. He dressed in purple and gold. He demanded that subjects prostrate themselves before him. There was no longer any pretense of a republic. It was an absolute Eastern monarchy. In 303, Diocletian launched the most systematic persecution of Christians. He ordered the destruction of all churches, the burning of Christian scriptures, and the arrest of the clergy. Christians who refused to sacrifice to the Roman gods were tortured and executed. Thousands of martyrs died. But Christianity, after 3 centuries of clandestine expansion, was too strong to be eradicated. It had communities in every city, among all social classes, even within the imperial family. The persecution failed. In 305, Diocletian, did something unprecedented. He abdicated voluntarily. He retired to a palace in Split, on the Dalmatian coast, where he cultivated vegetables. He is the only Roman emperor to resign peacefully and died of old age in his bed. The Tetrarchy collapsed immediately after Diocletian's abdication. The Caesars became Augusti, but their designated heirs were ignored. The emperor's sons vied for power. By 306, 6 imperial pretenders were vying for it. Constantine, son of Constantius, controlled Britain and Gaul. Maxentius, son of Maximian, controlled Italy. Licinius controlled the Balkans. Maximinus Daia controlled the east. Another devastating civil war erupted. Constantine invaded Italy to confront Maxentius. Before the decisive battle, according to Christian tradition, Constantine had a vision, a cross in the sky with the words, "In hoc signo vinces," "In this sign you will conquer." On October 28, 312, the armies of Constantine and Maxentius clashed at the Milvian Bridge over the Tiber, just north of Rome. Constantine ordered his soldiers to paint the Christian Chi symbol on their shields. Constantine's cavalry broke through Maxentius's lines. Maxentius's troops fled toward the bridge, which collapsed under their weight. Thousands drowned in the Tiber, including Maxentius himself. Constantine entered Rome in triumph. The following year, in Milan, Constantine and Licinius issued the Edict of Milan, legalizing Christianity and mandating religious tolerance. After 3 centuries of persecution, Christianity was legal. But Constantine went further. He openly favored Christians, returned confiscated property to them, built churches, and exempted the clergy from taxes. The persecuted minority religion was on its way to becoming the state religion. In 324 AD, Constantine defeated Licinius and became sole emperor. But he made a decision that would change history. He built a new capital in the east. He chose Byzantium, a Greek city strategically located on the Bosphorus, the strait connecting Europe and Asia. He rebuilt it monumentally and renamed it Constantinople, the city of Constantine. On May 11, 330 AD, the new capital was inaugurated. It was a Christian city from its foundation, without pagan temples, filled with churches. Rome, the eternal city, was no longer the center of the empire. Power had shifted to the east. When Constantine died in 337 AD, he was baptized on his deathbed. The pagan emperor became a Christian. The Roman Empire was fundamentally transforming into something new. But this transformation came at a price. The Latin West, with Rome at its heart, was being abandoned. And soon, that region would face a threat it could not withstand. In the steppes of Central Asia, beyond the known horizon of the Roman world, a nomadic people of mounted warriors began to move westward. They were the Huns, masters of the composite bow, capable of firing deadly arrows at full gallop. Their migration triggered a catastrophic domino effect. In 375 AD, the Huns shattered the Gothic kingdom on the Black Sea steppes. Tens of thousands of terrified Goths fled to the Roman Empire seeking asylum. Emperor Valens, in need of soldiers, allowed 200,000 Goths to cross the Danube as refugees. But corrupt Roman officials exploited them, selling food at exorbitant prices, even buying Gothic children as slaves in exchange for dog meat. The Goths rebelled. On August 9, 378, near the city of Adrianople in Thrace, Emperor Valens faced the rebel Gothic army. Valens had 40,000 legionaries. He refused to wait for reinforcements from the west, desiring sole glory. The Goths lured the Romans into attacking their chariot camp. When the legions were engaged, the Gothic cavalry returned from a foraging expedition and charged the Roman rearguard. The legions were surrounded and massacred. 40,000 Romans died, two-thirds of the Eastern Field Army. Emperor Valens died in the battle. His body was never found. It was the worst Roman defeat since Cannae, 600 years earlier. But Cannae was followed by a final victory. After Adrianople, Rome would never regain its former strength. For the first time, Rome had to negotiate as an equal with barbarians. The Goths were settled within the empire as foederati, federated allies, maintaining their own laws, culture, and leaders. It is the beginning of the end of the unified empire. In the year 395, Emperor Theodosius I, the last man to rule the entire empire, died. He permanently divided the empire between his two sons. Arcadius received the east with its capital in Constantinople, and Honorius received the west with its capital in Ravenna. Although nominally an empire, in practice it consisted of two separate states that gradually diverged. The east was wealthier, more urbanized, and defensively stronger. The west was poorer, more rural, and had borders impossible to defend. The two empires rarely cooperated militarily. When one was attacked, the other passively observed. The division was a death sentence for the West. Alaric was a Gothic leader who served in the Roman army, but never received the high command he felt he deserved. He rebelled and for a decade plundered the Balkans and Greece. In 408, he invaded Italy. The cowardly and incompetent Emperor Honorius hid in the impenetrable marshes of Ravenna. Alaric besieged Rome 3 times. The third time, in August 410, slaves inside the city opened the Salarian gates. For the first time in 800 years, an enemy army entered Rome. For 3 days, the Goths sacked the Eternal City. They spared the churches and did not massacre indiscriminately, but the looting was psychologically devastating. Rome, which had conquered the world, had been conquered. The shock reverberated throughout the empire. St. Jerome, in Bethlehem, wrote, "The city that captured the whole world has been captured." Alaric died a few weeks later. The Goths buried him beneath the bed of a temporarily diverted river with all his treasure. The slaves who did the work were killed so that the tomb would remain a secret. It has never been found. In 429 AD, 80,000 Vandals crossed the Strait of Gibraltar from Hispania to Africa under their leader Gaiseric. Africa was the breadbasket of the Western Roman Empire, providing the wheat that fed Rome. For 10 years, the Vandals systematically conquered North Africa. In 439 AD, they captured Carthage, the second most important city in the West. They built a fleet and became Mediterranean pirates. In 455 AD, Gaiseric sailed to Italy and sacked Rome for 14 days, far more systematically than Alaric. He stripped all the precious metal from the buildings, including the gilded bronze tiles of the Temple of Jupiter Capitolinus. He took the emperor's wife and daughters captive. With Africa lost, the Western Roman Empire lost its main source of tax revenue. It could not pay its armies. The end was only a matter of time. In 434, the Huns unified under Attila, the most formidable leader they would ever produce. Attila built an empire stretching from the Russian steppes to Germany. He extorted massive tributes from the Eastern Roman Empire by threatening to attack Constantinople. In 451, he invaded Gaul with 500,000 warriors. The Roman general Aetius, the last great commander of the West, assembled a desperate coalition of Romans, Goths, Franks, and Burgundians. The battle was fought on the Catalonian plains, near present-day Orleans. It was so bloody that, according to legend, the ghosts of the fallen continued to fight in the sky at night. Attila was stopped, but not destroyed. He withdrew, but the following year he invaded Italy, sacking city after city. Finally, Pope Leo I personally marched to Attila's camp and negotiated his withdrawal. No one knows what he said to the Hunnic king. In 453, Attila died on his wedding night with a young bride, possibly from a nosebleed while drunk. His empire collapsed immediately. The Huns disappeared from history as quickly as they had appeared. After Attila, the West languished for another 23 years. Emperors were mere puppets controlled by barbarian generals. Majorian, the last competent emperor, attempted to reconquer Africa, but his fleet was destroyed by the Vandals in 460. He was assassinated by the general Ricimer. For the next 16 years, Ricimer, a general of Gothic origin, held the real power, appointing and assassinating emperors at will. In 475, the general Orestes rebelled and placed his teenage son on the throne, naming him Romulus Augustulus, little Romulus Augustulus. It was a cruel irony. The last emperor bore the name of Rome's founder and first emperor. Scene 8. The End. In August of 476, Germanic troops in Italy, frustrated by Orestes' refusal to grant them land, rebelled under Odoacer, a Herulian officer. Odoacer captured Ravenna and executed Orestes. He entered the palace where the adolescent Romulus Augustulus awaited his fate. But Odoacer took pity on the boy. Instead of killing him, he gave him a pension and sent him to live with his relatives in Campania. On September 4, 476, Odoacer formally deposed Romulus Augustulus. He didn't bother appointing a new emperor. Instead, he sent the imperial regalia to Zeno, the Eastern emperor in Constantinople, declaring that one emperor was enough. He styled himself King of Italy. The Western Roman Empire was over. It didn't fall in epic battles or burning cities. It simply faded away like a candle going out. The empire that lasted 1,229 years from the founding of Rome ends with a teenager deposed without violence. For 1,500 years, historians have debated why Rome fell. Was it Christianity that weakened martial virtues? Was it moral corruption? Economic decline? Lead poisoning in the water pipes? Plagues? Barbarian pressure? The truth is that it wasn't a single cause, but a perfect storm of converging factors. The imperial system depended on continuous conquests that brought wealth and slaves. When the conquests stopped, the economy stagnated. The plagues of the 2nd and 3rd centuries killed millions. Inflation destroyed the currency. Constant civil wars depleted resources. Excessively long borders were impossible to defend. The division between East and West meant that the West faced the greatest threats with fewer resources. Assimilated barbarian generals lacked institutional loyalty to Rome. And finally, the mass migration of Germanic peoples pressured by the Huns was more than the system could absorb. Rome did not fall due to weakness, but due to the accumulated weight of centuries of structural tensions that were impossible to resolve. But although the Western Empire fell, Rome never truly died. The Eastern Empire, which historians will call Byzantine, continued for another 1,000 years until 1453. The Pope in Rome became a political power, filling the imperial vacuum. Barbarian kings called themselves Romans and tried to preserve imperial institutions. Charlemagne was crowned Roman emperor in 800. The Holy Roman Empire continued that tradition until 1806. The Russian Tsars derived their title from Caesar. Latin remained the language of education, law, and religion for another 1,000 years. Roman law forms the basis of European legal systems. Roman architecture inspires government buildings to this day. The ideas of republic, citizenship, and civil rights come from Rome. The alphabet you use to read this is Roman. The months of the year have Roman names. The institutions of the West, its languages, its laws, its political culture, are all heirs to Rome. The empire fell 1,549 years ago. But Rome, in a sense, never fell. It is here, in every city with a senate, in every legal code, in every concept of universal citizenship. Rome conquered the world once with legions, and it has conquered it again, forever, with ideas.